afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Darryl Praill. Welcome to another episode of Only 29 Minutes. And today we'll be doing an interesting topic on making marketing content that matters. And I'm joined today by Robert Rose, who I'm going to introduce shortly, but he's the founder and chief troublemaker, which I love, at the Big Blue Moose. So you can check them out online as we speak to you, literally, quickly, bigbluemoose.net. And if you want to check me out, you can find us out at myleadagency.com. So while we're doing that, let's set the stage. If you're here, it's because you responded to the opportunity to join this event, and it's about making compelling content. It's just the banner in front of you. You need it quickly. You need it cheaply. Where do you start? And what do you do? We're going to attempt to answer that today in a very informal session between Robert and myself, covering some key topics all around this. So what context do we have to talk about that? Well, we'll let you know shortly. But in the meantime, let's just do some housekeeping. First off, we will be taking questions throughout the show and after the show. So the show lasts 29 minutes, and we'll be done by 2:30 Eastern Time, 10:30 West Coast Time. Or I guess that's 6:30 right now, UK time. When the show's done, you can leave, or you can stick around for Q&A. If we can stick your question in partway through the 29-minute session, we will do that. So don't be shy. How do you do that? Well, you use the control panel that GoToWebinar provides. You see it highlighted here on called questions. You send it to us, and we'll get it, and we'll monitor it. If we can, we'll answer it. If not, we'll save it for after the 29-minute episode. The other thing you can do is you can use Twitter. So if you want to use Twitter, it's just #MyLeadAgency. We're monitoring that as well. Or feel free to comment on what it is you're hearing here us say. Whether you agree or disagree or have a different point of view, we want to hear it, and so do all your fellow peeps on the Twitter sphere. So with that all said, a little about myself. I'm the host today. I'm also the co-founder and what I consider is the chief protagonist of My Lead Agency. And I always thought that was a unique moniker until I saw the, head troublemaker with Robert Rose. So let me tell you a little bit about Robert, and then we'll get him online here. He is, as I mentioned, the founder and chief troublemaker at Big Blue Moose, where he helps marketers become storytellers, which, of course, is appropriate for today's session. He is a recognized expert in content marketing strategy, digital media, and the social web. And Robert innovates creative and technical strategies for a wide variety of clientele. So he actually has a pretty strong pedigree. For example, he's helped large companies like PTC, or First American Title, Valley Crest, American Camp Association, and Nissan tell their story more effectively through the web. He's also worked to strategize digital marketing efforts for entertainment and media brands such as Dwight Yoakam or Nickelodeon or NBC. So those are some pretty big names. He's helped marketers at smaller organizations such as East Harlem Tutorial Program or Coburn Ventures or Hippo and Magnus to amplify their story through content marketing and social web strategies. So that's quite the pedigree. But what makes him relevant especially to today? Well, Robert is actually the lead strategist in residence in the brand advisor for the Content Marketing Institute. He's a feature writer, guest blogger for the online magazines iMedia Connection, Fierce Content Management, and CMS Wire, and he is a co-author of the book Enterprise 2.0, How Technology, E-Commerce, and Web 2.0 are Transforming Business Virtually. As you might imagine, he's a frequent keynote speaker, and he advises a ton of people on how to do content marketing and websites as a whole. So someone like that, widely quoted in the press, but we're keen to have him here with us today. Robert, hi, welcome to the show.
Hi, Darryl. How are you? That sounds like it sounds like I'm busy, actually.
It does. I don't know how you manage it.
Thank you very much for I don't either, actually. And can I say I love your title as well, Chief Protagonist. I'm a big believer in telling stories, as you can probably tell, and one of the biggest things about that is who's your hero. And so I love the fact that you've given yourself the title of the hero of your agency.
The fact that you even know what the word means already puts you high up in my book. So with that all said, 29 minutes, we're already 5 minutes into it, folks. So we're going to keep to this schedule. We've got upwards of 7 topics we want to talk about today. And we're going to do our best to get through it. In the essence of time, we may abbreviate some discussions, or we may, skip them entirely if we get onto an interesting topic. But we're always going to hold true to answering, how to make compelling content as That was what got you here. We're also going to share with you along the way our contact information, so you can reach out to us at any point you want, one-on-one, Twitter, email, whatever, and we'll carry on the conversation. So this isn't just a 29-minute session today. This is to start up a relationship between ourselves and you. With that, the first discussion point I want to talk about, I want to kind of set the stage. So what I've said here is common myths about content, content production, and content purpose. And Robert, if you don't mind, I want to just kind of set the stage. I was on LinkedIn yesterday, and I happened to stumble across, in the group Inbound Marketing, a great discussion thread started about a month ago by a fellow named Ray Tamayo. And Ray posted a question that's had, last count this morning, over 120 responses. So, and it's still going after a month. His question is simple. What is the number one rule of content marketing? And I've synthesized down, which is relevant to this discussion point here, some of the answers. And I'm going to start from, shall we say, at the bottom of the list to the top. And people have said, number one rule of content marketing, authenticity. Inbound links to the content. Something that generates a response. Something that connects with your audience. Keep it simple. Freshness, fresh content. Compelling content. Use language that's easily understood by all. And this was actually said multiple times, especially, say, the high school level English. Manage your keyword or your search engine optimization insertions and what have you. Another interesting comment, 1/3 of the content produced should be casual to connect with the authors, to connect with the readers. Quality, balancing quality versus quantity. Saw this over and over again. It's not about you, the content creator. It's about the reader. Content is remarkable. But the number one thing I saw over and over and over again is making content that's relevant. So this is what 120 responses said is the number one rule of content marketing. And I'm going to give you my opinion on that in a second. Let's go over to you, Robert. Either comment on that or talk to me about some myths that you see a lot with your clients, both big and small, or the purpose of the content. Talk to me about your point of view here.
Sure. Well, so that the thing that you bring up on the LinkedIn question really speaks to that last point there, the content purpose, right? What is the number one purpose behind your content? And, you know, so we struggle a little bit with a definition of content marketing, but one of the core things that we absolutely believe about content marketing is that at the end of the day, it's about marketing, right? It's not content engagement, it's not content enjoyment, it's not content this or content that, it's content marketing. So the whole point is that it's doing something to affect or change a behavior. Now that can mean a lot of things, obviously. It can mean we're trying to drive that person into a sales discussion. We're trying to move that person into a more engaged status in a marketing funnel. We're trying to get that person to upsell, or we're trying to create a more satisfied customer. There's a lot of different conversion metrics along a sales funnel that we can use content marketing to do. But the end of the game is about changing or affecting a behavior. So that would be my answer for the number one purpose behind content. That feeds into, I think, a couple of myths that I'll just quickly outline that I think about content and content marketing. And the first one is many companies will believe that if you build it, they will come. I mean, we didn't learn this lesson enough during the .com 1.0. We need to learn it again, and that is if you build it, they won't come. We need to really evangelize our content and share it and get it out there so that we're actually starting to create a community about it. So just writing a blog isn't enough. We've actually got to get out there and start talking about and engaging with our community to start driving people into that content so that we can start that process through the sales funnel. The other myth I'll say about content production is an assumption that everybody wants to write and everybody can write. And I think one of the biggest pieces of creating a new content marketing strategy is understanding where the evangelists are in your organization and understanding their capabilities and where it is that they can actually produce content and how they can produce content and moving that into a process that works for you and your company.
So you struck a chord with me. I'm been feverishly writing whatever I want to respond to as you were talking. So I love your point about generate. I mean, one of the individuals on LinkedIn said generate a response. I think of that as, what you call to action. Really you're trying to, if you get them far enough to actually consume your content, you want them to actually act. So
absolutely. Every piece of content should have a call to action of some kind.
And so many people miss that. That's the first part. But you talked about everybody wants the myth that everyone wants to write. I can speak firsthand, just both as as a marketing or a sales exec, as well as an advisor to other companies. Everybody thinks they want to write, and you create production schedules, whether it's blog or otherwise, around everybody contributing, and rarely does that ever occur. And often you have a void of content. And then you just sit and scratch your head. So that's a big myth that people will all produce. You nailed it. Most people won't produce. So you better have some plan B or plan C.
It's interesting. One of the, so my background in content obviously lends itself to content management systems. And whether your content management system is WordPress or some enterprise-level web content management system, one of the biggest myths about putting in a content management tool is the major benefit that's often extolled is that, well, we're going to empower the non-technical people to be able to produce all this wonderful content. And guess what? Sally and Jane and Mark down in accounting and in sales, they don't want to be empowered. They're just quite happy to receive content or to actually throw their idea into a suggestion box and have somebody else produce it for them. So in many cases, it's not only giving them the tools to be able to do it, but it's also working in incentives and, as I say, teaching the choir to sing to get people to actually start producing the content that, that the organization can produce if guided into doing it.
And it's interesting because, to your point, well, content is important to you as a marketer or even as a sales expert. It's not important to Sally or Susie in accounting or to Billy in tech support. That's not their primary job. So while they're enamored with the idea of doing it, it is a myth to say that they will do it. It will be at the bottom of their pile. So if you're planning now, you're coming here and saying how to make the content, know that up front and have alternate, backup plans in mind. I'll give you my biggest myth. And I talked about this on Ray's comment on LinkedIn. Ray and I actually had a wonderful conversation about it. And in fact, he's funny because one of the points he makes to me is that content analysis is about clarity and giving the right message. So a myth is that perhaps your message will actually be understood, but remember, it's a written word. It can be consumed multiple ways. Ray and I had a bit of that in our exchange on LinkedIn. The point I was making on LinkedIn was that everything I read there, everything you heard me talk about, relevance, remarkable, keywords, freshness, keep it simple, authenticity, those are the hows. But his question was, what is the number one rule of content marketing? From my point of view, it's about the sales funnel. In other words, what is your sales funnel? What are the objections you get at every stage of the funnel? What are the questions your sales teams get asked at every stage of the funnel? What is your lead leakage and lag at every step of the funnel? And then what content do you have to decrease leakage, to decrease lag, to increase conversion so that you have, leads in and sales coming out? The sales funnel needs to drive the content, not anybody else's agenda. So that's a big myth we see, is that people miss the sales aspect about it. So with that, why don't we go on to the next slide here, which is a nice logical one. Remember the theories, how do we make great content? So discussion number 2. How do you determine what content needs to be produced? So Robert, you're sitting with your client, they're brand new, they want content. How do you recommend they determine what content needs to be produced?
Well, there's a wonderful exercise that you can go through, and it's one that I go through with just about every client I work with. And given the size of your organization, this can be a very large, exercise, or it can literally be something you can do in half an hour. And the exercise is this. You take the personas that you want to target, and basically you should have a persona for every type of product that you're offering. So basically, if they have a different buying cycle, in other words, if your persona, your target audience goes through a different buying cycle, that's a different persona. So that might be men versus women. It might be international versus domestic. It can be basically however you want to segment it. Take those personas, because those are the people that you're trying to tell your story to, and map them to the buying cycle that they have in your sales funnel. And basically what you're going to find is that as you start to do that, you've got different sales funnels, and you need content to facilitate basically each conversion metric. So you need a piece of content to drive leads into your organization. Now you need some content to make that lead convert into an opportunity. Then you need a piece of content to basically convert that opportunity into a qualified lead, and so on and so forth. And when you start to do that mapping of personas to the buying cycle, the sales cycle, and then what content actually helps facilitate the conversion from one progression to the next, you'll end up with a big gap. And basically what you'll typically find, and this is very, very typical with most organizations, is that you'll have a lot of content at the top of the funnel, and you'll have a lot of content at the bottom of the funnel. So you'll find that you'll have lots of content creating awareness, education, broad strokes of content trying to draw people into the top of the funnel. And you'll also have a lot of content at the bottom of the funnel, testimonials, case studies, basically the thing that are the proof points that your solution is the best. Where you typically will have a gap is in that messy middle. Basically, how do we get somebody from a qualified lead into a hot opportunity, right? Or how do we get somebody from that lead status over the hump of building the business case for our particular solution, or whatever it happens to be. That's how you determine which content needs to be produced. And it'll also give you a priority based on where you are with your sales or your marketing strategy.
So I love what you're saying there, especially the aspect of persona. So how many people online, and you don't have to respond, or you're more than welcome to respond using the Twitter feed of My Lead Agency with a hash, or you can respond here using the question window. How many people online are actually not using personas? And I put that out there because I know a lot of sites I go to, they say, oh, if you're the, you're the head of marketing, click here. If you're the head of sales, click here. And if you're a financial buyer, click here. And then the content is relevant to them. The example I use with my clients a lot is when I say, listen, you're at this part of the sales funnel where they bought into your solution, you convinced them they need it, you convinced them to overcome the pain, and now they have to go and present it to the CFO to get a sign-off on the purchase order. And you try to go with them like a good sales rep to say, let me pitch it for you, and they say, no, I will talk to the CFO because I don't want you talking to them. And sometimes you can't avoid that. So now you're relying on that individual who usually is a champion internally, but often a middle-level person, to be able to go talk to a CFO using CFO terms and language. And they don't have that skill set. They don't have that training. And a lot of deals are lost right there because that champion can't speak to the CFO in a way that they agree that it's a good investment for the corporate funds, and that deal's lost. So that says to me you need some content there that's CFO specific. Perfect example of the persona element you're making. What I often tell my people is the first thing you need to do is stop thinking like a marketer and start thinking like a salesperson, and talk to your sales leadership and a few of your key sales advocates and champions internally, and just say, walk me through the funnel. What do you talk about at this stage? What do you talk about at this stage? What do you talk about at this stage? What are the questions you get asked? Exactly as you were alluding to. And then what pieces of content do you have to give them clarity or to reinforce the points you're making? One of the things also I think is interesting is you talk about personas. That's tied to a messaging matrix. So if you don't have a messaging matrix, you may want to think about that. So you can tie in a messaging matrix that appears in your website, that also appears in your sales scripts and your common objection handling, that also appears in your content. So tie that all together.
Yeah.
How should the content be utilized? As like time's flying by here. We knew this would when we rehearsed this, Robert. How should the content be utilized?
Well, that's a great question. So just feeding back into the previous question, I think this tees it up very nicely. Is content is there primarily to change or create a reaction to some sort of behavior, right? You're trying to drive some sort of result using that content. So there's a lot of different things you can do with the content. And feeding back just to the last question, once you've done that mapping, once you've done mapping with the personas to the elements of the sales funnel that you want to apply it to, now all of a sudden you have really interesting insight, not only into the content that's resonating, but also into where you're attracting people. Because content can be a real baseline for your measurement. Because if you start to notice that as you are marketing your content, in other words, you're sharing out there and you're on the social web and you're sharing your content, you've got a blog, you've got white papers, whatever it is you're producing, and you've mapped it to the persona and the various sales funnels, now all of a sudden you notice this is the most popular piece of content we're producing, and guess what? It's in the middle of the funnel. So our traditional marketing practices, whether we're using search engine optimization or pay-per-click or print or television, basically we're attracting people right into the middle of the funnel. Does that mean we want to do something about that, or are we happy about that? In other words, we want to attract more people in through the top and nurture those leads a little more so that basically by the time they're getting to the middle of the funnel, they're already precluded to our product or service? Or are we really happy about that because what it means is we're attracting hot buyers in that we can convert very quickly? Obviously, those insights into those measurements are going to be unique to your organization, but the content itself can start to tell you the story much more granularly about how your overall marketing messaging is working at what stage in the funnel.
Love it. All right, so let me give you a different point of view how the content should be utilized, supporting what you're saying, which is kind of cool. I should mention, folks, Robert and I didn't give our answers to one another on these questions. So what you're getting is very much a live point of view based on our mutual experiences. So it can be utilized multiple ways. The most obvious way is the social media, right? You want to drive, lead flow in the social media, and that's always done by adding value, content, something that generates, that's relevant, a big message we saw in Ray's LinkedIn conversation, to your social media followers, et cetera, LinkedIn, et cetera. So that's a given one. Another way it can be used very effectively is your marketing automation or your inbound marketing and lead nurturing programs. So once somebody enters the top of the funnel, and you know there's a natural, period of time it takes them to work through the funnel, you can be drip feeding them these pieces of content, which increases their lead scoring if you're doing that, so that when it gets to the sales rep finally, that they're already very well qualified. So that's a great way. Talked about personas, Robert did. So on your website, have these out there. You can have, soft intercepts, hard intercepts, no intercepts, whatever you want, to encourage, them to always do that call to action to actually do something. So, but another big part is inbound links. So you should be, Robert said something about you being active, not just making it and they'll come, because we know they won't. So that means actually getting out there and looking for conversations that are going on every day around certain topics that are important to your target audience, and then contributing to the conversation and saying, by the way, we wrote a great white paper, there's a great video, you can link on it here, which then brings them into your site and also increases your search relevance because they see all the links. So use that because Google is everybody's homepage. So with that, big one, how do you manage expectations or demands of internal stakeholders regarding content? So it's been my experience, Robert, that the CEO will want to spend $15,000 on a very polished video highlighting the company and himself and his management team and their vision, and often the buyer doesn't care about that. Or the head of sales has a real vision that we need a white paper. Maybe, a lot of companies, especially B2B side, they're so enamored with their product, they think everybody cares about the technical architecture, and they put all the money into the technical architecture white paper. But as a good marketer, that neither of those are going to generate any kind of leads or conversions relative to what you've seen in your personas and your segments. But they're powerful, and they're taking a ton of your budget away. That's just one example. How do you manage those expectations and demands of your various stakeholders?
Sure. So first and foremost, if the CEO comes in and wants to do a high-powered video, guess what you're going to do? So let's just be real. So at the end of the day, at some point, as the marketing guy, you go, yeah, we'll do that for you. But in all seriousness, the real key here is the measuring twice before you cut once sort of process. By taking a strategic view of your content, doing the mapping, understanding the measurement, understanding what your cost per lead is or your cost per acquisition, or how much you can spend to move someone through the funnel at what stage, Now all of a sudden you have a really interesting equation to be able to back out and say how much should you be spending, how much should you be putting effort toward your content. And so if the CEO or someone lower in the organization says we should spend XYZ on this super slick video because that's the only thing that's going to motivate people, you can say, look, that really doesn't make sense because we have to spend XYZ, or we shouldn't spend XYZ to draw people into this. So we can either do a lower budget video or we can try something else. The real key here is iteration, taking small steps, iterating, and learning in a much more fast pace to understand what it is that's working so that you can make changes very, very quickly. Showing results and being able to come back and show that internal salespeople, hey, look, here's what's actually moving people through the funnel. Here's what actually is that's working. That speaks volumes more than them just saying, hey, we think we need this white paper, but we're not really sure. If you can come back and say, no, you actually do need this, and here's actually the angle we're going to take on it, now all of a sudden marketing and sales are working together.
I love that. It is about the analytics and the measurements. Marketers hate to do it. You have to do it, folks. Get tools that'll do it for you if that's a weakness of yours. I'm a big fan of the A/B test. When you have a difference of opinion, say, fine, we're going to spend part of our money on yours and part of the money on mine, and let's watch what works better. And it's hard to argue with that for the most part unless they're really strong personalities, in which case then you need to get buy-in from multiple stakeholders and then, circle around again. But very much we can help you with that one-on-one. In the essence of time, I'm going to go on to the next one here, which is how do you leverage existing content or make new content affordably? And I'll handle this one directly, which is, here's a simple thing that most people miss. So you've got content. Maybe you've got a limited budget, and you decide that you want to make a white paper and some blogs and a case study, and that's it. That's great. That's one approach. Hopefully you followed our advice. You've actually mapped the sales funnel. You've looked at the content you've got. You've seen how it addresses the FAQs and the objections. You've talked to your sales reps. You've done the personas. And you only have, and you've decided that that white paper and the case study is what you needed. I would suggest you go in a much more interactive approach. And here's my point of view. Video is well loved. It's well consumed. It's well indexed. If you do a video with somebody, or a webinar, which is another form of video, ironically, you get a lot of content. You can edit that down into sound bites or into a 1 or 2 minute segment. You can use open source software. You can use a Mac. You can use iMovie to include it with the product. It's very affordable these days. But then that can quickly become a podcast using something like GarageBand, and your incremental costs are negligible. So now you turn a video into a podcast. And that full-length video can then become a transcription. If you pay somebody, it's a couple $100. Maybe you get an administrative assistant help you, or you do it yourself. And you've got a virtual, transcription that people can read. Because some people, you have to remember, people consume content in different channels. Some like the written word, some like video, some want to listen to it in their MP3 player on the bus. So then you can drop a press release. You can go to something like Marketing Sherpa and say, I've got a case study, I've got a press release, I've got a video, I've got a transcription, I've got all the quotes highlighted for you. You don't need to call anybody. Here's the story. We already have their permission. And then you issue the press release once the Sherpa story releases, linking to all these pieces of content. But it all began with one video. And then the costs are incremental. So I'm not necessarily advocating video, but what I'm advocating is an approach that allows you to take what you make and put it in different consumable forms of content. So there we go. How often should you produce content? What's your school of thought on that?
The velocity of content that you produce is really going to be a function of your strategy. And so at the end of the day, the number of pieces that you produce, and by the way, I always, going back to your other question there, I always recommend to my clients, a good goal is to see if you can repurpose your content into 3 or more other pieces. And if you can do that, you're tripling your output. So how often should you blog? How often should you put out new content? Well, how often do you need to? I would say with a blog, any less than once a week stops really becoming a blog, and it just becomes sort of a content feed, and that's okay. And I would say start small and be focused on being regular rather than producing more than you think you can handle. In other words, if you think you can realistically handle one blog post and one white paper, or say one blog post a week and one white paper a month, do that, because that, if you can be consistent, that's the real critical piece here rather than producing an avalanche of content. Also, how often can you produce quality content? And that's the real key here. It goes back to the very original question. How often can you produce the content that really tells your story, that really changes or affects a behavior and moves you toward a sale?
Love it. We're going to stop it there for a second, folks, but we're not done. So that's the 29-minute mark, almost on the dot, thank gosh. So that's good. Thank you for staying with us this far. We've gotten through 6 of the 7 discussion items we want to get through, so I'm going to bring the 7th bullet into the Q&A session. But I want to remind you at this point in time, a couple of things. You're free to go if you want to go, and because we only committed you to half an hour. And you will get an email from us within 24 hours with a complete archive of this piece of wonderful content. And you can share it or review it at your leisure. I know, again, talking to Ray Langton, he says he reserves Saturday mornings for his education. I love that. So feel free to do the same thing yourself. So you can go if you want to. But if you have time, we invite you to stay, because we're going to have a few more minutes of Q&A. And that's where you come in. We invite you to send us questions. So you can do that by, again, submitting your questions on the Twitter feed through #MyLeadAgency. Or you can use the GoToWebinar function right in your control box there where it says questions, and you submit it to us. And so we do have some coming in. So please send more. Don't be shy. Some people always are shy for some reason. And then as we go into the Q&A, we're actually going to carry on. But I'm going to forward here right now, and I'm going to leave that slide up you're going to see shortly, which is our content information. So we encourage you to follow us at My Lead Agency. We encourage you to follow Robert_Rose on Twitter. Go to our website to check it out, see what we've done. And by no means are we experts. We're learning just like you, but this is based on our experiences ourselves and with our clients and best practices and what have you. So please carry on the conversation. Please submit us your questions. And with that, I'm going to start the Q&A session. And my question really is the last slide we want to cover off. So, Robert, I heard you talk about always having one piece of content becoming 3 or 4. How do you exploit and distribute the content for maximum impact? Any tricks of the trade?
Sure. You know,
heavy
what
sigh.
I like to, yeah, yeah, exactly. It's one of those things where, again, it's going to come back to the unique process that's part of the organization. But let me just give you a couple of tricks that I've learned. One of the things that typically happens once you start producing content is this overriding fear of repeating yourself. And it's because you think that everybody views the content like you do. And as you start to produce it, you start to become very familiar with it. So seeing it on the front page of your website, or seeing it in a Twitter feed, or seeing it on LinkedIn, or whatever the methods are that you're using to share it, can seem like, wow, we seem to be repeating ourselves. And you shouldn't be afraid of that. Don't be afraid of reminding people 2 or 3 times per month that you have a piece of content out. So now you can start to draw a little map, and you can say, okay, today on the 5th of the month, we're going to produce this white paper. Then we're going to share it through our social media channels, and we're actually going to write a blog post about this. It's a shorter form of this white paper, and we're going to link to it. We're also going to share it through this advertising campaign we're going to do, and we're going to have a webinar about it as well. Okay, now we've repurposed that content into 3 different venues, and we've basically gotten ourselves through maybe the 10th of the month. There's nothing wrong with, at the 17th or the 20th of the month, repeating that process. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. People will miss it in the overload of information that people have. People will appreciate the fact that they're being reminded. And really the strategy and the way you do that, of course, is up to you and your business. But don't be afraid to leverage the content you have and run a summer repeat. I mean, the TV networks do it, so there's no reason that you can't do it either.
I love what you're saying. There's been studies on this, folks. What is the right number of times to repeat a piece of content, especially on Twitter? That's a real big thing. And some of you, I know you've all seen people who just post the same freaking thing over and over and over again. It becomes pseudo-spam. You just tune them out. Don't do that. But you do want to go, extra little effort and rephrase what you're posting. All right. So even when we were promoting this webinar, we didn't use the exact same post over and over again. We try to mix it up. But we've seen studies that say anywhere from 5 to 7 times you can replug a piece of content just on Twitter alone. And the premise being, to Robert's point, maybe I do it once today, and then I do it again, in 2 days, and then I do it again in a week, and I do it in 3 weeks, and I do it in 7 weeks, and I do it in 12 weeks, that kind of concept. The other aspect is times. So there's been studies that say, don't be afraid to appeal to the European time zone or the West Coast time zone. So when you're posting the content you've produced, mix it up a bit. European, depends, of course, on your audience is, your target audience is, the consumer, and where they're geographically located. But don't be afraid, because those people have networks, and they're going to retweet and share your information, which is going to ultimately drive more credibility, more links, more relevance back to your site, which consumes more content. You guys have been great to send some information to us. One of the big advocates in this space is a company called HubSpot. They've done some of their own studies, and they've got a blog post that talks about how companies that blog more have more consistent sales. They've done some tests on that. So, if you ask HubSpot, they'd say you should be blogging every day. In fact, multiple times a day if possible. That's where you get a team in. The other aspect is use technology tools, products like, for example, Hootsuite is one example. There's many out there. You can actually schedule different platforms and different posting timelines. So you yourself don't have to be always online. You can just, distribute it. Lots of ways. Social media is not the method here today, but that's how you can exploit it. Give you an example here. So we've done this webinar. We have a webinar once a month. But the webinar always leads up, when this webinar is done, we'll turn this webinar into a podcast. It'll, of course, be a pseudo video as well with the slides and the audio you see here. We'll also turn that into a blog, and we'll also turn that into a small little, best practices piece. And then we'll share that over and over again. So exploit it that way. Also, another point is how do you exploit your content? Just like you're seeing us do right now. So, for example, for full disclosure, Robert and I didn't know each other prior to this event. But through mutual connections, we were introduced as we should work well together, and so we're able to cross-promote with one another's network. Another way to take content and reach big and reach broad. So you're not in this by yourself. Let's recap a little bit. We had promised that we would talk about this session be about making content that matters. You need compelling content. You need it quickly. You need it cheaply. Where do you start and what do you do? So Robert, help me recap this. To me, I heard you say, understand your personas, understand their buying cycles and the sales stages. Do a map. I heard you say that you probably have a lot of stuff at the top of the funnel, maybe a lot of stuff at the bottom of the funnel, maybe a little less, and probably thin in the middle. Figure out where you need that content. That's the first part. The second part we said was repurpose your content, like we just talked about. The other part we talked about was get alignment with your stakeholders, sales or executives, on what you want to do. And if you have a problem with that, do something like an A/B testing or, what have you. But always use metrics and analytics to make your business case on what makes the most sense. But if the CEO wants that expensive video, good luck with that. Don't be afraid to use technology. Don't be afraid to cross-promote and leverage one another. So if you're having writer's block, and that happens to me, it happens to everybody, and then I would maybe go read Robert's blog and say, awesome stuff there. And I'm going to do a blog about Robert's blog and give him full credit and links to his site, and maybe build upon what he said and share it with my community. So, help each other out. And then how do you do it affordably? We talked about repurposing it. That is truly it. Using tools like a Mac, for example. I'm not advocating Apple. It's just one tool. There's lots of open source pieces out there. We do a lot of our podcasts using Audacity. Open source costs you nothing. But when you have one piece of content, it's very easy to, in nominal incremental cost, to turn it into other ways. Understanding your buyers, your consumers will consume that content in different ways. Robert, interesting question just has come in here. Is old-fashioned, hard-driving sales dead? So
Yes.
a bit of an outlier on the question, but I like it because we're talking about content here. Is there a place for it on the web? Because content really suggests soft selling, and I saw that in Ray's LinkedIn conversation, a lot of soft selling. So is old-fashioned hard driving sales dead?
Well, I mean, I immediately said yes, and then I'm rethinking my answer. So here's what I'll say. Is if hard driving sales works for you, then no, it's not dead. You know, there are plenty of products and services out there where hard driving sales based on the traditional motivators, discounts, you know, specials, hard driving, you know, I mean, even, dare I say, the FUD sale still exist out there today and are effective mechanisms. What I would say in the long term is that the buying cycle has changed. The internet, the web, and digital, and the expansiveness by which that is now available to people through mobile, social, and regular old web channels has changed the way people buy. So from that perspective, I dare say most industries are affected by that. So what that means is that where the hard sale may still exist, the soft sell in the long run is going to be more productive. Telling your story in a more compelling way and being able to tell your story where you become the trusted source of information about the product or service that you're providing is ultimately the way to survive and thrive, maybe even more accurately, in the long run.
So what I would say to that is it's a combination. Not only do I not think it's dead, I think it's actually critical and instrumental, but let me give context. If I look at the funnel, again, everything's coming back to the funnel in this discussion, I think as it should, I would argue that the top of the funnel is a soft sell. Buyers today are way more researched and knowledgeable than they were years ago because of the internet, because of social media. So if your content is truly authentic, it describes the pros and the cons. It doesn't try to say we are the best thing since sliced bread because nobody believes it anymore. Then you are actually addressing the top half of the funnel, especially where they're slowly acquiring the knowledge and at the same time they're building up trust in you, the author, and the company you represent. And that's the unstated thing on all of this. Content really is about overcoming cynicism. It's about building trust, which is what the old-fashioned sales rep tried to do with his own personality. Now, if you monitor and track the content that's consumed and the frequency with which it's consumed or shared, then the sales rep will probably get involved in the bottom half of the funnel and reach out and take over the conversation and try to close using those hard selling techniques. Two things. One, they now have access to the content that was consumed. They know what you consumed if you're using tools like a HubSpot or Marketo or an Eloqua or a Pardot. So they can actually be intelligent about the conversation. They don't have to start doing all this discovery and qualifying. They can actually just go right to what you were inquiring about. I see you read this paper. Is that important to you? And then two, they're benefiting from the trust that your content created in your organization. So they do go hand in hand.
Yeah, and I'll
here. Go ahead.
Let me just add one other thing to that, which I think is I think you're absolutely right. Maybe the best way to state that is everybody's funnel has been extended upward and downward. And so the hard sales process definitely plays an important role at some point, but everybody has to deal with an extended top end of the funnel now. And I would argue that there's also an opportunity at the bottom end of the funnel, because one of the main drives of marketing these days is to not only create customers, but to create satisfied, upsold, and retained customers. And content marketing can have a huge impact there as well, but that's a whole other webinar.
Absolutely. A variety of questions here, Robert, and we're getting short in time. I'm on a respectable calendar here. I'll let you cherry pick one of these if you want to. Some questions about, how should they budget for content production, cost-wise maybe, or effort if they don't have the resources in-house? That's one of the questions. Another question is, how do you convince people that we actually need to invest in creating content? A lot of people just think of press releases and, brochures still. Another question, can content marketing or content succeed without social media? Very interesting question. I know there's some best practices questions about just content duration or word counts or etc.
Yep.
So I'll let you cherry pick any one of those.
Sure. Let me take the ones that are typically the hottest, and that's the budget and business case. So there has been some studies done about budgets. People are spending anywhere between 8 and 15% of their marketing budget on content these days. Now, where's that money coming from and where's it going? So it's typically coming from other elements that aren't proving as effective, and that would mean media tactics, like television or newspaper, or those types of things that are proving less effective these days because of the advent of the digital strategy. But where is it going? It's not going back into media tactics, going into content production, whether you're hiring freelance writers, whether you're putting in blog software, whether you're now hiring editorial people to clean up content, video production, all basically the content production. What it doesn't do is it doesn't replace those things. It doesn't replace the fact that you're actually advertising on all your various channels. It replaces what you're doing with that advertising. And so we talked a lot about the sharing of content and using content to actually drive engagement in. You're going to have to market that. And so now instead of, and I'll give you just a quick example of this, I worked with a software company. And as you might expect, their software pay-per-click campaigns, their search campaigns all said, click here and sign up for a demo free trial of the software. And they would get lots of conversions on that. What they found was that those conversions were basically tire kickers. They were basically people who wanted to try a free version of the software but would never buy. They switched that campaign to download this white paper on how to build the business case for this software. They got less conversions, but the conversions they got were all real, serious buyers. So when the salespeople called those people that had downloaded the white paper, they got a much higher hit rate to serious buyers and also didn't waste as many resources with the free software trial. So using your traditional marketing methods to start to advertise your content can actually make a ton of business sense. That's also, by the way, how you can start to build the business case. If you can't build a holistic business case, try an experiment. Just build a case for producing some content, whether it's white papers, etc., and trying some experiments and see if it actually proves out. Start to expand that using just more and more holistic campaigns, and pretty soon what you'll realize is that you've got a good percentage of your business marketing budget focused on creating and marketing your content and driving leads into wherever they are, mapping into the sales process.
We're going to wrap it up with one more question here, and I'm going to be a little tongue-in-cheek for a moment. The question is, the comment, the difficult part of content marketing is when to do the call to action. At what point can your content start creating the call to action? So before I get Robert's thought on that and let you folks carry on, I'm going to make one comment. Both Big Blue Moose and My Lead Agency create content. That's our call to action. You need help? Check us out. Email us, Twitter us. We'll respond. We'll help you out. The advice is free, and the engagement is incredibly rewarding. How's that for my call to action? So with that said, Robert, at what point? Is there a rule of thumb on when to start actually going for the call to action?
Absolutely. Every piece of content should have a call to action. What the call to action is should be specific to what behavior you're trying to change or affect. So in other words, if I'm trying to use a piece of content, say a white paper, to create somebody that's more engaged, maybe my call to action is just as simple as, if you like this, sign up for our newsletter. No salesperson is going to call you or anything like that, but you get them to actually take a conversion process to know a little bit more about them at that point so that you can actually start to email them. Then the email newsletter call to action is, if you like this, sign up for a free trial or call a salesperson, et cetera, et cetera. Every piece of content has a call to action in it, but what that call to action is should be relevant to the action you're trying to take and move them at what stage in the funnel. So if you're having people say buy now at the end of a lead awareness piece of content, obviously you're making them make too big of a leap and it's not going to work. But if at the end of that funnel you've nurtured people all the way down into it and you're saying buy now, well now you've taken them through a journey that is actually makes a lot more sense.
So I totally agree with what Robert's saying in the sense of, what is it you want them to do? And everyone should have the call to action, and it should lead from, A to B and B to C. I'll give you a different way of thinking about it. Same concept, which is if you have mapped your funnel relative to each persona or each product, cycle, because everyone's different, and you kind of understand by talking to your sales professionals and measuring that against your analytics and all that wonderful stuff, your CRM tools, that there is a logical flow, there's a logical series of questions and objections that need to be overcome as they go deeper and further into the cycle, then I like to make content clearly that starts at the top and ends at the bottom of that funnel and addresses each piece. And so that when I produce content that perhaps offers up the first piece, the top of the funnel content, the call to action would lead them to kind of content relevant to the next stage, and that one would lead into content relevant to the deeper stage, and so on and so forth. Because one of the things you don't always know is you don't know where they are in their buying cycle. By the time they come to you, they may have done months of research, and yeah, they were intrigued by some top-of-the-funnel content you had, but they're actually in their buying cycle and their knowledge, they're actually in the middle of the cycle. So the idea of leading them through that funnel and hoping that eventually you engage them right where they are and hook them, that's critical. So call to action should always lead somewhere. You should always have one. With that said, folks, I want to do a couple things. I want to thank you. We've had phenomenal attendance in this event, and you've all stuck around. That's been fantastic. So much great gratitude and appreciation for that. Thank you for your time today. I want to thank Robert. Robert, you're just a wealth of knowledge, so I can see why you're being so incredibly successful. So thank you for your time today, Robert.
Thanks for having me. This was a ton of fun.
This was a blast. I love these conversations. I do want to remind everybody that within 24 hours you will be getting an email link to this piece of content. Please share it. Send it to whoever you want to. Don't be shy. Tweet about it, blog about it, do lots of things. Robert and I are available to talk to you. You can reach out to us in the contact information on your screen. And we'll be doing this again at My Lead Agency with another 29 minutes next month, the month of August. So look for our invitation. In the meantime, get to your next appointment. It's just around the 8 more minutes, and you should be headed to something. Thanks for joining us today, folks. Have a great day.